Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. How do you feel about violence in entertainment? How do you feel about parents who monitor their children and don't let them watch just everything they make available on television? It's a controversial issue. Most of my friends, I think, are okay with that, with letting children or letting themselves watch all kinds of shoot 'em ups on TV and movies. And there are even these arcades where at least they used to go to play these games. Anyway, we're going to talk about that today because we have two women here who have strong feelings about this matter. And we're going to examine the basis for these feelings. One of them is my longtime friend, Rose Dyson, who has founded, I guess, or at least has been the head of for a long time, something called the Canadians Concerned About Violence in Entertainment. And you can tell from the title what her position is on this matter. And she's a scholar who's written on the subject and continues to produce things for Peace Magazine every now and then. She's also been very active in the Canadian Peace Research Association for several years. So I'm glad to say hello to Rose. Good morning, Rose.
Good morning, Meta.
And
Thanks for the opportunity to join you today.
yes, now, and you have suggested that we invite a friend of yours, or a sort of a colleague of yours, who does similar work. This is Charlene Doak-Gebauer. She is in London, Ontario. She's the founder and chair of Internet Sense First and another outfit called the AICET Council, which stands for Anti-Internet Child Exploitation Team. Hello, Charlene. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you, Meta. Thank you for having me on the show.
Okay, and you're a former teacher, right? A high school teacher,
Yes.
and very much interested in education. And I see in the background on the wall, you have, must be a book that, were the author or something? It says, The Internet, Our Children in Charge.
That's my newest release. I've published 2 books. Yes.
So you think that the children get their way and demand things, or what? Tell me what you think is going on there. What does this title imply?
Well, the answer to the question is, are children in charge? Yes, they are. Too often, parents are saying, I really don't know what they're doing. They're so smart. And I explain to everyone, we need to know what they're doing. We need to be supervising digitally. As a computer specialist, I have created a user-friendly theory of digital supervision so that parents can supervise their children. Traditional parenting is good, but unfortunately, we have the digital age now, and we have to start digitizing our parenting. What is online now is making our children so vulnerable that we have to be very careful. And that's what digital supervision is all about.
Oh, okay. Well, how are you going to supervise these kids? I mean, there are things that you install, or I guess they come already installed on the TV set, so you don't. You can set it so that they have to have a password or something to watch. Well, tell me about that. That would seem to be the lowest level stage of supervision. You put something like that on your TV set. What?
Right.
And I don't even know how that works. What is that?
Well, that's blocking certain things on your television set. On a computer, you can have blocking software, and as children get older, they can work around any software. I have worked in close association with a company that has made a hardware filter. And they said, we need to work in close association with you because digital supervision should be considered interdependent with our hardware filter. Because when children are on a computer that the hardware filter is filtering, you can see what they're doing. When they get on a gaming system, they're on a separate server. And that's where all the chats start. And that's where predation is huge. Predation, according to Thorne in the United States, has increased by 10,000% in the last few years because of the internet.
Oh, okay. Now, when you say predation, what's involved? I mean, surely it's not people saying, meet me in the park. I have a piece of candy for you.
No, these children are the predators. There's an online predator handbook now, basically because of COVID, and it tells predators how to target the children that they can get to take their clothes off. They want them to do sexual acts online, and they can be what is called a capper and secretly taping them and using anything they get from these children for their financial gain. And it is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's happening all the time. Parents have to start talking about the challenges they have with their children instead of thinking it's hiding the dirty laundry, because every family is challenged by the activity of their children online.
Wow. Well, that's a domain that I have never, it's totally new to me, frankly. Thousands of them.
Oh,
What's the matter with it? Just says another piece of evidence that there's something gravely wrong with our society. I'm every day I wake up and I see the extent to which the public opinion of the general populace is messed up. There's what's the matter with us? That should be it's so rare. It should be never occur.
that's right. And there's a tremendous amount of violence. There's pornography online. Children as young as 5, 6, 7 years old addicted to porn, and their parents don't know, which is why digital supervision is so important. And Rose, I think you can add to that when it comes to violence
Yeah.
online.
Well, yes, I can. And I think when you consider violence in the media, we have to take a step back and look at what happened back in the Reagan years when so much media was deregulated. There's something called the Fairness Doctrine that was eliminated. It called for balanced views in reporting of the news of one kind or another. And gave rise to the shock jock, the talk show hosts like Howard Stern and Rush Limbaugh and so on. And then in the media entertainment aspect of things, the Hays Code was eliminated, which sort of opened the floodgates to all kinds of violence pervading popular culture.
What was the Hays Code?
It was a code that established certain boundaries on what could be put on the screen and what couldn't. In other words, no gratuitous violence, no explicit sexual content, a lot of swearing and so on. What was by the opponents considered to be prudish Victorian standards were imposed on what was allowed in entertainment. Well, once that was dismantled, there was another component to a court case at the time that reversed a previous precedent that had said entertainment media, anything coming out of Hollywood, is it was really business. It wasn't entitled to the same kind of protection under the First Amendment that political speech was. Well, that was reversed, and of course, there's been controversy among legal scholars ever since as to whether it's appropriate for pornography and violent entertainment in the media to come under the umbrella of protection under the First Amendment.
This Hays thing, was this a self-regulating rule put out by producers of movies, or was it a law from the government?
It was a government established code, and but then there were lots of lobbying going on in those days, as there has been ever since, to ensure that the public perception is that the jury is out as to whether there's any significant research showing harmful effects. And I think it was the Motion Picture Association of America became beholden to the industry, and they're the ones that determine the criteria under which various productions could be aired. So that has just increased. The bar has been lowered significantly ever since, to the point.
When did they abolish this Hays
It would have been in the 70s, 70s and around that time. And since then, it's been largely up in the US, largely up to the industry to establish a classification criteria of one kind or another. In Canada, we have provincial boards that have classification criteria, but we're very much guided by what comes out of Hollywood on this. And video games, for example, is the industry that more or less decides what's appropriate for parental supervision and so on. And that's very controversial and considered inadequate. We've never had classification criteria established by anybody that would involve health professionals and people who understand behavior development theory of one kind or another for children.
Well, are you saying that right now is pretty much a Wild West, that anything goes? Or
Yes.
really, anything goes if there's, I presume that the reason there's stuff there is somebody's making money from it.
Yes, very much. All the very much dictated by our profit-driven system of social, political, and cultural organization, and it's a very hard to actually even separate news from ads or from entertainment media. We've all heard the catchphrases infotainment or edutainment. I mean, television programs have product placement in them now. There's been lots of scholarship on how the trend for the last 20 or 30 years has been toward making the news entertaining, and investigative journalism has suffered. So you get all of this combined, and and then to some extent, television in particular, as Marcia McLuhan and others wrote, or Noam Chomsky is very good on this. It has created sort of a collective common sense because we all watched the same shows pretty much until there was a proliferation of too many stations. But then social media came along and splintered all of this, so that now we've got these echo chambers and people talking in little niches, not necessarily to anyone else with a diverse opinion, but so we've never really had freedom of expression in a way that the corporate lobbyists would have us believe. I mean, traditional media, like newspapers and to some extent television programmers, they decide what we're going to see, hear, and read. Meta, you edit a Peace magazine. You make the ultimate decisions as to what appears between your pages and what doesn't. Well, with social media, that's been fractured to a large extent, but you still have the capitalist model that's overseeing everything, so that while the traditional media got to decide what we see, hear, and read, the social media with their algorithms direct our eyeballs toward products that feed their bottom line. But and then
you've set my mind off in a new direction into a grievance. I guess it's a grievance that I haven't articulated before much, but about just plain news. I spend several hours a day. I take the New York Times, the Globe and Mail, the Washington Post on my Kindle. It arrives on my iPad, and then I watch all kinds of things on Facebook and so on. Now I can understand when it comes to Facebook. Well, what I'm finding is that the presentation of ordinary news is almost similar to the thing that you get on social media. That is, I used to take the Sunday New York Times and I would spend all week reading it. Big fat thing with all kinds of information, international affairs and things like that. And now I can zip through the New York Times on my Kindle in no time because it's little pictures. Every story has a little catchy picture and a a catchy title, and they're just clickbait, really. It's what they call clickbait, is it?
Yes, that's
Yeah,
right.
it's
Yeah.
very interesting, catchy little popular titles and things like that. The amount of coverage of international news, world affairs, or something like that, it's terrible. It's not there. And it's not just the
Well,
New York
Meta,
Times.
yeah.
It's vanished. There's no international coverage, and it's and what they do. Most newspapers, if some new event happens, the Pope dies, or some discovery or something, they repeat this. Every columnist will repeat the same story. They'll all talk about the same thing. They don't ever go off and talk about anything different. And this has to be somehow related to the fact that we consume news on TV and on the computer instead of reading, you know. And
Well, uh, I get the New York Times on Sunday, and I frequently read the Globe and Mail, both online when I'm out of town, particularly, and in print. What I found is that what you get online is not necessarily what you get in print. In other words, they don't necessarily, they aren't necessarily compatible, and there's no doubt that there has been. I would say a contamination or a copying of how the news is presented. I mean, it's been pointed out that newsprint magazines or papers have borrowed certain strategies from television and so on. But when it comes to online news, I mean, this is repeated frequently that um, uh, uh, talking heads, for example, and repeating the same thing over and over again is much less expensive than investigative journalism. And investigative journalism is suffering these days for a variety of reasons, largely because a lot of the content has gone online, which has interfered with the traditional newspapers' advertising base, because most of them have been sort of supported not only by subscriptions but also by ads. But it's
I think the
uh,
Globe and Mail is actually better than the New York Times, and the Washington Post for political matters is better than the New York Times. So, I don't know whatever happened to the good old New York Times, because they're pop culture now. That's all there is to it.
Well, to a large extent, you're right. I do find that yeah, even the Sunday Times doesn't give one that much meaty stuff to go through. And I like the Globe. I get it on a daily basis and like it too. But as you know, there's lots of controversy about whether any of this is really harmful, whether it's for the children or for us as adults. I think Charlene and I are among those that believe that more media literacy is required amongst people of all ages, not only children in the schools. But a part of the reason for so much controversy is because it's been in the corporate media's interest to sustain the notion that there's no conclusive evidence showing harmful effects, because that enables them to continue with business as usual. And
Okay.
mhm.
So show me the evidence,
Well,
because
all right.
I had recently exactly this came up. We did a book review of something about mass killers or something like
Was
that.
this Grossman's book?
No,
No.
no, it was something more recent. I don't even remember it. But the reviewer said, well, there's no, it's really not related to things like video games or exposure to violence entertainment. And I said, well, I think I've seen evidence that it is. I'm pretty
Yes.
damn sure.
Mhm.
So tell me what the evidence shows.
Okay, well, here's the way I see the field of research having evolved on this over the years.
All right.
First of all, you're familiar with the book written by a couple of scientists based at University of Pennsylvania, titled "Merchants of Doubt." Okay, and then there was a documentary that was done on this. And what they demonstrate in this book, according to their research, is the ways in which research media is tainted and skewed skewed depending on who's conducting it. And the same kind of controversies that surrounded the debate over tobacco, does it really cause cancer from smoking and so on? And eventually there was a breakthrough, and the dust kind of settled, and there was in the court system anyway agreement that it did. Well, you have, they argue, the same kind of controversy out over climate change. I mean, you've got the doubters that come out on this, and I've often said I'm thoroughly familiar with the process because I watched this on the subject of violence in the media. And I can recall back in the days when this was much more topical, I'd have interviews with people like Jonathan Friedman, who would argue there's no conclusive, so a psychologist was based at UT, who used to argue that there's no conclusive evidence showing harmful effects. And I'd say, well, you've got to, in any kind of research, I remember being taught in my graduate work that you always ask a few fundamental questions. Who's providing the funding? What kind of questions are being asked? And what's the purpose of the research? And if one looked at where Jonathan Friedman would usually be getting his research money in those days, it was from the Motion Picture Association of America, run by the Hollywood industry. So, and this is in my first book on this subject, based on my doctoral thesis published 20 years ago, I review the literature and this kind of controversy as it's evolved in a variety of different methodologies. And in my most recent book, the one that's supposed to be out this month,
let's look at the cover.
well, I don't have it in front of me. It's coming this week.
All right.
The title is Mind Abuse, Media Violence and a Threat to Democracy. Things have become more serious in the last 20 years.
Media violence and the threat to democracy.
That's right.
Wow. All right. That's, yeah, I can see where you're going with that from the title. Yeah. Okay. Now, all right. So in that current book, you're showing that.
Well, I'm showing that the problems have become more pronounced in terms of what we're experienced in the societal breakdown. As I said earlier, in social media, with the algorithms and the divisiveness that has manifested itself from the nature of it, we've got not only products that are being marketed but also something that George Gerbner would call the mean world syndrome, or David Grossman would call acquired violence immune deficiency syndrome, because we know whether it's with social media or any kind of entertainment media, sex and violence attract people. We're genetically programmed to respond to that kind of stimuli. Sex is sometimes regarded as associated with life and happiness and so on, whereas violence with death and destruction. So our attention is immediately garnered by these two ingredients, and they have been used over the years as cheap commercial ingredients because they sell well on a global market and translate easily into any language. And now you've got this accelerated with social media, and there's on the video games particularly, which are exceptionally lucrative and probably among the most harmful forms of violent entertainment because of first-person shooter interactive nature of them. They now have overtaken both the music and the film industries in annual revenues. They're that much more popular, and yet the lobbyists have been extremely successful in persuading governments to do nothing about them. And
okay, I'm that's a whole line of conversation, but I hope you'll give me a summary of the evidence that exposure to violent entertainment does have psychological effects in general, or on some special subset of the population. Either way, is there definite evidence that it's harmful?
Well, it does create a tendency toward desensitization, toward aggression, and As a matter of fact, more recent research demonstrates brain damage. CAT scans actually demonstrate this, so that people, a lack of empathy is another problem. You see, especially in teenagers that have grown up with this, and the problem with these interactive first-person shooter video games, as psychologist David Grossman has explained very well, is when you and I were growing up, or prior to this kind of entertainment, if one harmed a playmate or a classmate in school, or a sibling at home, there were repercussions. You were reprimanded for it. But with first-person shooter video games, there is a tendency for the player to be rewarded with points for blowing the heads off as many virtual enemies as possible. And so what is involved here? It's the same kind of techniques that are used to train the military to kill with impunity on the battlefield. There's B.F. Skinner psychological conditioning involved that leads to real problems. And one of the reasons why, as Grossman has demonstrated in his research over from, I think it was the 70s when video games first came on the market, to 2016, there's something like 23 mass murders in schools perpetrated by children under the age of 18 alone. And that doesn't account for all the other mass murders that we've had around the world in one form or another. And it's also been documented and reported on in the Globe and Mail. This is not something that isn't out there in the public domain, that white supremacists really like video games because they suit their us versus them mentality, the narrative in these games. In fact, they watch releases of these games to see which ones best suit their purposes for recruitment. There's Mark Bowery is a military expert that I think teaches at the University of Ottawa, who's written a book on this, The Killing Game, I believe the title of his book is. And he indicates that many terrorists, homegrown and otherwise, are steeped in violent video games and pornography, so that a lot of these violent video games are the narrative involves misogyny, racism, as I say, us versus them mentality. And this is something that your Proud Boys or these QAnon conspiracy theorists thrive on. So I don't know if this answers your question, but
well, it goes in the right direction. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with the thing you've said, but I'm aware that Charlene probably has her own suggestions about what we need to do about this. So I want to invite Charlene into this conversation too.
yes.
Tell us, you've heard all of the complaints already. I'm sure you were already familiar with Rose's point of view, and you've got it. I think you share most of it. What do we do about this problem? And I think you have a notion that there needs to be more parental supervision.
A lot of people are going to governments, and governments do have to make a stand in some regard. It's very difficult to block on the internet. And I tell everyone that parents traditionally have been responsible for a minor. And just because there's a screen involved doesn't mean that they don't have a responsibility. They can't throw their hands up in despair and say, my child knows more than I do. And what I tell everyone is that your child, because they can operate a cell phone quickly, and gaming and digital devices in general, does not make them a genius, because these devices are all user-friendly.
Or morally sound, but well developed.
Oh yeah, and the parents can learn these devices, and they have to. If they let their child go out to learn how to drive a car, do they let them go without help? We have to change our whole perspective on parenting, and I say we have to digitize our parenting.
And what does that mean?
To practice my theory of digital supervision.
Okay,
Just
how do you do it?
there are that's a loaded question. There are a number of ways of doing it. There's one thing in particular I tell everyone in the beginning is to make sure the location of your router is in an area that is controlled by the parent. And that could be in a closet with a key. It could be in the parental bedroom. And you turn the router off at night when you are finished with the internet, so that electronics in the bedroom are not a problem. You've got it turned off. But the children can then not tiptoe over and turn it back on, because these children are, oh yeah, they're doing it all the time. And I've had some parents tell me that they take
Guys.
their router to work because they can't control their kids online.
Really?
Oh yeah, and they never look at the cell phones. And I've interviewed students. I speak in schools, and they'll say, "Oh, we have galleries of nudes on our cell phones," and these are pictures of themselves naked. And when they do that, they are in contravention of the criminal code in most countries. They're producing child pornography.
The children themselves are producing it.
Well, if they take a picture of themselves nude, and nudes are an epidemic in schools.
Do adults that you know go around exchanging nude photos of themselves? I mean, why would children, much less adults, do such thing?
Adults do it. Children are doing it. They think it's funny. When I speak in a school, I will say, "How many of you have heard of inappropriate pictures?" And they'll go, "Yeah, nudes. Yeah." And they think it's funny. And I'll tell them, you do realize that your parents are paying for that digital device, your cell phone. And your parents, when you do this and you're under the age of 18 and they're paying for it, are in possession of child pornography. When I
Also,
tell parents that, they get quite concerned.
yeah,
Okay.
Charlene, also speak about the number of perpetrators, sexual perpetrators that really, because of the pornography that's so prevalent among teenagers and in schools today, are kids, boys between the ages of 15 and 11 and 15, I believe it is.
We have a lady on the ASIC council that is a SANE nurse in Kansas City. And that's a sexual assault nurse examiner. And they have done research and realized, as has David Finkelhor at the University of New Hampshire, that most of their predators are between the ages of 11 and 15, and they are attributing it to free pornography online. And what they're doing is assaulting siblings or other children younger, so that the sexual assault is now being done by younger people. And they are saying it's because of exposure to pornography online. There are a number of different sites online. It's a free enterprise system. Unfortunately, porn is legal. And unfortunately, children are exchanging ideas on how to access porn online. I've had parents call me from around the world telling me my son has been on this XXX site and the son was 6 years old.
Yeah.
What should I do? And one part of digital supervision as well is that you need to have a digital supervision contract with your child whenever you give them a digital device. That the cell phone, for example, will be docked in the parental bedroom every night. No cell phones go into your bedroom or the bathroom. You make sure that your parents have the password to your cell phones. Parents are not even checking the galleries on their cell phones, the pictures. In every school I have spoken in, every school without fail has said, we have had kids charged with producing and distributing child pornography in this school.
Well, we had St. Michael's here in Toronto.
Yeah. In the United States, in some states, these kids are on the sex registry for life. We have a lady on the ASIC council, Chevelle, who has 3 criminal law firms. And she has defended many teenagers who've been charged, thinking it's funny. As I said, they think it's a joke and no one will find out, but they do find out.
Yeah. And Mette, have you been following any of the coverage on Pornhub that was written up in the New York Times? It's the largest pornography distribution center in the world, started up in, are you ready for this? Montreal. And it was Nicholas Kristof of the New York Times that wrote a big spread on this. And at the conclusion of his article, he said, we've got Justin Trudeau, President or Prime Minister of Canada, who purports to be a feminist. How come he, in fact, all Canadians allow this kind of huge pornography distribution center to exist in Canada? It's considered the 10th most popular website in the world, and it distributes not only the kind of porn that Charlene's talking about, but rape videos and so on. It's also considered, next to Facebook and Google, the most influential component on the internet today. And
hearing, what is it? It's a website, and people anywhere in the world can go and watch it, or
including all the teenagers we're talking about. Yes,
they can upload to it. It's an upload site. Yeah. So that they were saying, I witnessed the ethics committee, and they were saying that they're monitoring everything. They're making sure they're legitimate registrants. However, they have also mirrored their site to the dark web. And they said that they investigate the IP addresses of anyone that uploads to the Pornhub and the MindGeek, which, by the way, they've changed their head office to Europe.
Yeah, but for tax reasons, yes.
Yeah. Well, what could I mean? I don't know whether Justin Trudeau deserves this criticism, but what could he do? What, in fact, should be done and can be done to shut down something like that?
Well, the problem is that the internet is worldwide, it's global. And when you're trying to identify different things with it, it's a jurisdictional issue. So that how do you say this was produced in, let's say Pornhub has different sites all over the world. People can upload to it. They're now on the dark web. The dark web has total anonymity, so that you cannot search IP addresses. It's like,
I guess we have to take a little excursion to talk about the dark web, because it's a term that I got a notice the other day from one of my, these things you keep on your computer to make sure you're notified of bad things. And it said, you appear on the dark web. And I thought, what is that?
Oh, okay. That would be facial recognition, probably.
What is the dark web? I mean, okay, it's a big question, but quickly.
I can tell you very quickly. There are 3 levels to the internet. The first level is the one we're on right now. You can get search engines like Google, Yahoo. Anyone can go on it. Then there is the deep web, where you need a login. And that would be police officers, health sciences, that sort of thing. Then you get into a section called the dark web. You need a specific type of browser, which usually is called Tor, and it's called the Onion browser, because you can peel away an onion and still not get to the bottom of it. So it's called an onion browser. You can browse the dark web and no one know what your IP address is, which makes it very good for people that want to trade arms. They want to do any type of criminal activity. And governments, I can't blame governments. I don't, because as a network administrator, I managed a network of 350 workstations. Trying to find out what a kid has done on your server within a school, it takes a long time, and sometimes looking for a needle in a haystack. You try searching that on the internet with billions of users. It's very difficult to do. It's very difficult to block things. I know in China, they have blocked social media, but they have an underground cafe. There are people on social media all over the place in these countries that think it's blocked. It's not something that's easy to do, which is Charlene. Predators are saying this is so easy to find our children. The Predator Handbook online is telling them you can find a target. These kids within 30 minutes will meet someone in person or provide a nude for someone, because they still think There's too much ownership being put on our children, is what I'm telling people. There are people going into schools. I want to tell them they have to be safe. They have to make this decision. Don't talk to these people. There are adults that can't do that. You talk about a 7, 8, 9-year-old child with no life experiences, no maturity level. I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I tried to get off with anything I could.
Yeah.
And kids online are dangerous doing that.
All right, Charlene, we have a little bit of a difference of opinion in terms of whether government can do anything or not. What's your take on the discussion that's now going on between, say, Australia, Britain, and France, and Canada, for that matter? I mean, the Globe and Mail has an article today on the Australians standing firm on checking Facebook and the excesses on that platform. Although in that case, it's these private digital giants have been trying to persuade us that they're quite capable of regulating the harmful content themselves. Well, that's proven not to be the case. In Australia, it's my understanding it's more a cost issue where they don't want to pay the newspapers for content. But surely we have to move in the direction of some supervision and regulation, responsible government regulation.
They do. There are regulations regarding child pornography. There's regulations regarding violence to people. In the Canadian Criminal Code, it's very well defined. I was just on 5 different public safety webinars put on by the Government of Canada. And they were talking about what they're doing there. The 5 Eyes is what you were talking about. There are 5 different countries involved trying to regulate what's going on online. But then you see there are pornography laws, let's say, it's a free enterprise system in these countries that are in the 5 Eyes. Pornography is legal. So then when you get it online, trying to block that, well, then you have a free enterprise system, people involved in porn that say, hey, we're doing nothing illegal. And when I was witnessing the ethics committee interview with MindGeek and Pornhub, they said, we're not doing anything illegal. We're trying to get any child porn off of our site, but we're doing nothing illegal. And when they were asked questions, they would say, well, we're doing whatever, their methods. I can tell you, after being a network administrator, that it is difficult to monitor everything that's going on. You look at the internet and the billions of people on there. They now have facial recognition, which is good because they were arresting people that attacked the Hill in Washington, D.C. with facial recognition. Mm-hmm. And that opens up a whole other issue. Are people aware of how much facial recognition is there in putting pictures up of their children online?
Now, what's the implication of this? Facial recognition could be good if it's used by the police to catch the guys who stormed the Capitol in Washington. But you're saying facial recognition is being used against children in some way?
Also in pornography production, there's lots of examples of hardcore porn where awful, brutal things are being done to women, and they might have a smile on their face. Maybe that's a technical thing, maybe not facial recognition. Go ahead, Charlene. You have a better understanding of this than I do, I think.
Well, if they see a picture of a child and they like it and they have the right software and get the right algorithm, they can find that child anywhere in the child pornography twisted platform. Yeah. So it's really good in trying to nail down criminals, but anything that is invented, the criminals are ahead as well. Yeah. That we've got the internet and they have turned that into child pornography is a multi-billion-dollar industry. There are parents using their children for that industry. It's not just pedophiles doing this.
Well, I suppose it's like racism or misogyny. They're not illegal, but they're social ills that we have to try and campaign against. Chris Hedges, who's written on the subject, argues that people who object to child pornography, but think that consensual adult pornography is okay are making a huge mistake, because both kinds are predicated on dominant submissive behavior that is really contrary to what egalitarian relationships should be all about. I mean, Catherine McKinnon was a feminist scholar that wrote extensively on this, and the arguments are still very much with us and unresolved. And so the problem is growing, and there's another dimension, though, to internet use and misuse. Again, as I said at the beginning of our interview, there's lots of wonderful things about the internet that most of us wouldn't know how to get along without these days. But from the standpoint of climate change, there's digital use of one kind or another is not carbon neutral. The amount of carbons emitted by internet use and servers in particular is, according to a study done by Greenpeace and put out in 2014, comparable to the airline industry. And there have since been other studies done in the UK and reported on in the Guardian, indicating that Japan, for example, if it continues on its current trajectory of the need for energy for digital devices and internet use of one kind, it's going to outstrip the demand for energy in every other sector of society. So these are also questions and
well, I'd question that. I would think that you'd have to question the balance between, if you don't use, for example, I use Zoom about 4 hours a day. But if I didn't have Zoom, I would either have to stay home, or I would go running around town creating a lot more greenhouse gas, talking to people, or flying to Europe to see them, because I wouldn't be able to,
Of course.
So you'd have to balance the various sources. I think that's a different conversation. But let's wind up here with, is there anything that you two can agree on as to policy? Well, is there any halfway solution? I'm hearing you say that because of the fact that pornography, for example, and violent entertainment is not illegal, you can't really rule it out in any significant way. Is there anything that can be done that should be done that both of you would endorse?
Well, let me just start with one way I think that the feasibility of producing and distributing it could be reduced, and that's for regulation that would eliminate grants and tax breaks and subsidies for audiovisual productions deemed to be contrary to the public interest. Now, of course, that needs to be, or would be, debated, but there has been legislation introduced in the House of Commons in Canada in 2008, but the lobbyists got there, and so in other words, you're at least making it more difficult for the stuff to be produced and distributed. I mean, we were talking about Pornhub earlier. It was reported in the Globe and Mail last week, I think it was, that they actually have gotten grants from the Quebec government for their operations.
So okay. Do you? What's your take on?
Well, when it comes to children, the Canadian Criminal Code is one of the strictest in the world. That is in place. Our definition of child pornography is any sketch, picture, drawing, audio story, anything audio or anything written, even to the point that if someone who is caught with child pornography, they have to prove that they did their due diligence to decide how old the child was in the picture. That, because it's that strict in the Canadian Criminal Code, is helping a lot, because then you can make arrests, and that the Criminal Code is huge for that. Other than that, we have to have some other types of guidelines limiting them. But when you have the dark web, which is worldwide, that becomes a bigger issue. It's difficult for police to even investigate on the dark web because of the layers of the onion.
Well, how can you do anything about the dark web? I mean, that's, I imagine, a bigger topic that you want to get into.
It's bigger than we are, let's put it that way. And governments, public safety ministries, and around the world are trying to figure all of that out. It's where they're selling arms, they're doing all kinds of illegal things. The one thing I tell parents, they'll tell me that my kid has been on the dark web and they've been trying to investigate it. And I tell them, you have to get your child. That is not a place for anyone to be who's innocent and really doesn't know anything about life.
Mhm, mhm.
Just on the subject of child pornography and the way it's embedded in the criminal code, I've been at this subject long enough to have been a part of those that pressed to have that child pornography inserted as being illegal in the criminal code. And I can remember the battles we had in those days in the 80s with the pornographers who kept insisting it was overreach and a slippery slope and so on. So there are ways in which the legislation can be pushed forward. As you point out, Charlene, it's working on with the child pornography in place. In my books, both my first and my second book, I review the history of its development and how many times it's been challenged over the years. Not so much recently, but certainly soon after it was first implemented.
Mhm.
Excellent. Thank you for doing that.
Yes, thank you both for your obsessions.
Yeah.
In this, I can see you spend a lot of time thinking and worrying about this, and maybe the rest of us should spend more time thinking and worrying about it, because I must say I haven't really given a lot of attention to it, but it sounds very much more important than I've recognized. So I appreciate this.
Yeah.
Thank you, Meta, for doing setting it up for us.
Sure. Carry
Thank
on.
Charlene?
Bye.